Okay, so this is the next episode of Not a Victim, a Survivor: Life Beyond Domestic Violence and Rape. It's my book, and in this podcast, I'm hoping to share my story and elaborate on some things that may not have been in the book. If you want to purchase the book, it's on Amazon. It's also um, available in e-reader form on Amazon. Um, okay, let's get started. So, after my life with Walker, I had a strength. Yes, that's true. And it's hard getting out of domestic violence. I can swear to you that when you marry somebody, you just don't see what's going on. You just maybe are too blinded by love. Maybe there's a sense in some people like me that I can save someone, that I can help someone. And so maybe I saw Walker as someone that he loved me and I loved him, and he had a lot of flaws. And maybe I thought that I could somehow fix that for him and for me. After all, he was marrying me and he was accepting my daughters. So I don't know how to say it other than I did love him with all my heart. But I was scared of him and he hurt me, and the pain of going through a domestic violence relationship is so brutal and so hard. It's indescribable to people that don't understand. So, anyway, I can't tell you the number of times I cried at night after I left Walker. I thought the ache would never go away, and in a way, it never did. I don't think I'll ever truly be over him. Our divorce was simple, quick. I had a restraining order against him. And after our divorce, after it was completely over, he really didn't bother me. He bothered me at first, but he really didn't bother me after that. And I knew he loved me. And I knew he was sorry for what he had done. But I knew that he was drowning in his own demons. He did reach out to me a couple of times, but I don't know how to say it other than I was moving on, and I was trying my best to forget. I guess that's the way I would say it. I remember I just threw myself into work. I worked every chance I could get. I had to. I had to pay bills. After all, I had two kids to support. I didn't even decide to go back to school, and I did decide, to go back to school and take some night classes at the closest college, almost an hour away. I was trying to take my mind off of being alone, so I tried to stay busy. I had gotten my EMT license when I was with Walker, and it looked as though my career path in nursing was going to take shape after all. Everyone thought I was doing really great for myself. My life seemed to be Not so much a wreck anymore, but I was a wreck. At least that's how I thought of myself. I found that I was clinging to work, school, and my kids to keep my sanity. Looking back, I did everything, I had everything going for me. I was finally safe. I was building a promising future for my kids and me. I would go out every now and then with my friends from work whenever I was able to get my mom to watch my kids. However, my views on men started to change. I would go out, find a male companion, have a great time, and if I wanted to, end up sleeping with him. If I didn't want to, I wouldn't. Sometimes I would even give guys false names and false numbers so they would never be able to find me. It was like a shield I had placed around myself. I thought that I was strong enough not to need a man, and I felt like using them for a change instead of someone using me was somehow better, I guess. Looking back, I was only fooling myself. In my heart, I knew I was aching for the human affection that goes along with commitment. I knew I was missing being married and having someone to come home to. I was still longing for my knight in shining armor, someone to hold me and take care of me. Then probably the worst thing in my whole life happened. I hate to say this, but I had a friend named Donna. She was one of my closest nursing friends, and she'd asked me to go out with her to a local army base. She said there were a lot of guys there and we'd have a really good time. I think the exact words she said were, we would have a blast. I knew the reason she liked to go there. I wasn't stupid. At our regular bars, we would spend half the night waiting to be approached, and it was a hit or miss. We would have an occasional fling, but at the army base, the guys were like wolves, ready to pounce on anything wearing a skirt. I agreed to go with her, and we went to a large club on the strip outside of the main gate. It was full of men, hitting on us right and left. At first, the night didn't go too bad, but around closing, Donna vanished with one guy, and when she returned, she asked if I wanted to get with someone and go for a drive. I said no, not really. We really needed to start home. Donna said her guy had a friend. She started begging me to give her a little more time, so we ended up staying. Somehow, we got separated. Actually, I think she just vanished. I ended up with this loser, and Donna went off with her guy in a separate vehicle. I remember we were just talking at first, and I was trying to divert his attention from any prospect of having sex. Then all of a sudden, he was like a rabid dog. I don't remember what happened. All I remember it was he was like an animal, and he raped me brutally. I was forced onto my stomach and sodomized. The pain was almost unbearable, and it seemed to last forever. He was tearing and ripping at my clothing. I can't remember his face. I don't know his name, but I still remember what I went through that night. I used to have nightmares and wake up in a cold sweat. Gradually, over the years, the nightmares have subsided. How could this have happened to me? I was only 25 and already had been raped 3 times. I had felt responsible in some way for the first one. After all, I was a young girl in a trailer with a bunch of drunken men. Or young guys, I guess. I should have known better. It was like I was just asking for something to happen. The second time was with Walker. Although he did force himself on me, I had waved the rape off because he was just trying to break my spirit. And I loved him. It wasn't necessarily, even though it was a rape, it wasn't. I don't know how to say it any different. And then, I mean, they were all rapes by definition, but it would be this one that ultimately haunted me. I was bleeding, and when Donna came back to the car and the both guys left, She asked what was wrong, and I told her that I had been raped and I needed to stop to get cleaned up somewhere. I can remember we stopped at a convenience store and she went in and got some wet paper towels so I could clean myself up a little. Donna went home with me and I got in a hot bath and soaked for hours. She asked me what I was going to do and I said nothing, just try to forget it. I made her promise never to say anything, not to anyone. I was just going to put it behind me and no one would ever know. You're probably thinking women like myself should not let rapists get away easily, but when you report it, you go through hell. At least that is how I saw it. I would be scrutinized for going out of town, getting in a car with someone I didn't know, not to mention I didn't even know his name, and besides, I was on the pill, and AIDS really wasn't prevalent back then. At least not where I lived in a small town. All I was concerned with was that no one could know. I had to forget it. I had to heal myself. No pointing fingers, no courts, and definitely no police. I know after this happened, I never thought anyone should tell a victim of a violent crime how they should feel. They know what's right for them and what they are able to withstand. I knew I wasn't strong enough to say anything, and have people talking about me. Having to live in the memory of an attack was going to be hard enough. Instead of staying away from the army base, I ended up going back with Donna every once in a while. I hoped in a way I would run into him again and get my revenge. Although I didn't know how I'd go about that. Donna eventually ended up meeting and falling in love with the guy, and then I began to be more of a shuttle service for the both of them. She didn't have a car good enough to drive the distance back and forth, so I ended up being the chauffeur. One night while waiting for her guy to get off work, Donna and I was at a little bar right across from the base, and I met a guy playing video games. His name was Kyle, and we clicked instantly. I noticed he was wearing a wedding ring, so I was pretty safe just talking to him. He said he was separated and that she was talking about divorce. Kyle said he wasn't sure of what he wanted. He said he was confused, so we just sat and talked. Donna and her boyfriend finally came over, wanting us to find them a preacher. They wanted to get married, and they wanted to do it tonight. I remember we drove down the road laughing and found a phone booth. We called everyone we could to find a preacher willing to do a last-minute wedding. But in the end, Donna and Johnny weren't able to get married that night. Sorry. They had to get blood tests, a marriage license, etc. And it turns out there was a small waiting period as well. Kyle and I talked for a little while, and then Donna and Johnny said they had wanted to go home. Kyle and I said our goodbyes, and I told him if his wife really wanted a divorce, he shouldn't try to stop her. The only way a marriage works is if both hearts are loyal to it. Maybe she had lost her love for him. I told him if it didn't work out to look me up, and then I gave him my phone number and address. When I left that night, I truly never expected to hear from him. I kept thinking, who am I to give wedding advice? Or marriage advice, I'll put it that way. I hadn't been able to hold on to any man, and God knows I'd tried. I remember exactly what day it was. July 4th, 1986. I just got off work and needed a date to go with Donna and her boyfriend to a fireworks display and then a nightclub. I'd basically been begging and pleading with everyone to go out with me, but all the guys that I normally went out with had already made plans. Then I got my phone call from Kyle. He asked if I had plans for the evening or that weekend, and I told him about my predicament and my desperate need for a date. He said just give him directions and he'd be happy, exceedingly happy to go with me. I told him he had to be there by 6:30 because the fireworks started at 8 and it took an hour to drive from my house. He asked me to please wait for him, and that he would be there as soon as possible. I hung up the phone and went over to Donna's to tell her about Kyle. Her and her boyfriend were all bummed out. To be honest, I don't think they approved of Kyle. Why, I have no idea. Maybe it was because he was a higher rank than Donna's boyfriend, Johnny. Maybe it was because Donna was a little jealous that she hadn't gotten him first. Donna and I had dreams of meeting that special person who would take us away from our small town that we lived in. Donna even more than me. I had been away and I hadn't really minded being back in my hometown, at least not yet. However, Donna was extremely unhappy with her surroundings. She was thinking of moving before she ever hooked up with Johnny. She had just received her RN license and had been looking over her opportunities for work in other towns. All three of us went back to my house to wait, and then before we knew it, it was almost 7. They started complaining and urged me to dump Kyle and just go ahead without him. After all, I could hook up with someone once I got to the bar. I finally gave in and we left. I left a note on my door trying to explain what happened, and it read something like, "So sorry, we had to leave. I tried to wait, but Donna and Johnny said if we didn't leave now, we'd miss the beginning of the fireworks. I'm really, really sorry. Call me again sometime if you're not too mad." Although I really expected Kyle would never want to see me again. After all, as after all, he drove far just to see me, and for me not to be there. I remember the fireworks went okay. Afterward, we went to a nightclub like I often frequented, and I partied big time. Actually, we all did. I don't remember much. However, I do know I was plastered. I remember dancing and going outside for fresh air, and then I remember like I needed to sit down somewhere and sliding down against the building. The next thing I remember was a guy walking up to me and hearing him say, "Do you need a lift home?" I replied, "No." He said, "Let me help you." I'm probably lucky he wasn't a psycho killer. I went with him out to the parking lot, and while we were getting into his car, Donna showed up and asked where I was going. He told her he knew how drunk I was and he was just trying to help me. Donna asked if I was going home, and I told her maybe, I don't know. She quickly asked if she could borrow my car so Johnny and her could go to a party they had been asked to. I remember the guy that had rescued me from the sidewalk said he would take me home if I would just give him directions, and then Donna looked at me for an okay. I said she could borrow my car, and then I told him I lived an hour away. He said that was okay, he knew the area. Then he told me he was a cop. For some reason, that relieved my fears about him taking me home, although I don't remember much about his looks or about the ride. I just slept the whole way home. Once we got to the apartment and went to the door, I found a note attached. A different note. When we went in, I read the note. It read something like, "Sorry I missed you. Had to make a stop, and I was late getting here. Really want to get with you. If if you get home and you read this letter and there's a red laser in the parking lot, I'm in it, Kyle." I thought to myself, I bet this looks good. Kyle was probably sitting outside in my parking lot when I came home, not only drunk, but with some random guy. I just knew Kyle had to be mad as hell. I went to my bedroom window and peeked out, only to see a red laser pulling out of my parking lot. Yep, I was right. He was definitely mad. I woke up the next morning surprised by the fact that a stranger was laying next to me. I didn't even know his name. I just remember thinking as he left how lucky I was to be alive. I never saw him again, and he never called after that night. Donna and Johnny finally brought my car home, and Kyle called around lunch to see if he could make the trip back to my house. He asked if I was mad at him for not showing up. You have to be kidding. You should be mad at me. I asked him if he knew whether I was home when he left, and he said he didn't think so because he had been sleeping and he woke up at 6 a.m. then left. He didn't see my car in the parking lot. I was so thankful he hadn't seen me come home with that guy. That that would have looked really horrible and definitely a little slutty. I told Kyle that he could drive down if he wanted to. I remember when he got to my house, we had a really good time talking. He was so charming and intelligent, a good-looking, clean-cut, all-American guy with soldier written all over him. To me, Kyle seemed to be a very stable person who knew what he wanted, not a typical scumbag, which I had been so attracted to. When we started to date, he impressed me a lot. He was kind, he was gentle, always treating me like a lady. I know it wasn't easy for him to see me. After all, I lived an hour away from the base, but he drove down every weekend. Kyle was content just to stay around the apartment and really seemed to like my kids. He also liked his I also liked his humor. Donna said shouldn't get involved with Kyle, at least not too deeply. Kyle's rank in the military was an E6. He was also married. Although he was now newly separated, he didn't have any kids. Donna asked, why would he want to have mine? She had a point. I had introduced one of his friends to my friend, and they began to date too. Then one day, just out of the blue, Kyle told me he had to go overseas to Germany, and he would be away for at least 2 years. Great. I finally meet. Sorry. I finally meet a guy that cares, and now he has to leave. Isn't that just my luck? Cal said he didn't want to leave, but he had to. Then he said, would you like to come with me? I told him, yeah, right. Like, how am I supposed to do that? He said, you'll marry me. I was shocked. Marry him? If you marry me, the army will bring you and the kids to me. We will have to stay 4 years instead of 2, but at least we'll be together. Marry me. I want to be with you. I remember saying with little hesitation, yes. Yes, I'll marry you. To tell you the truth, I have no earthly idea why I said yes. Maybe it was because I didn't want him to walk out of my life. I know that if he hadn't had to leave, I wouldn't have said yes so soon after we had just met. Likewise, I don't think he would have asked. It was just a spur-of-the-moment thing and a decision that had to be made soon so that arrangements could be made for me to go with him as soon as possible. There was lots of paperwork to do. 2 days after his divorce was final, we were married. Passports, identification cards, not to mention all the army paperwork and stuff. How we managed to get it all done was a wonder to me. I know what you're thinking. Why? I don't know why. I don't. All I kept thinking was, if he goes overseas for 2 years, he'll forget about me. Things will change. After all, out of sight, out of mind. I couldn't take that chance. Kyle could be the prince that I had been waiting for. And if he left without me, well, I might miss the only chance I had to find happiness. I don't know why, but I just jumped in with both feet. After all, I had everything. A good job, a school, apartment, both my kids. Yet I was going to uproot my kids and go to a foreign country. Maybe I did it because I was in love with him and I didn't want to be without him. At least that's the way I would like to see it. After all, I really believed I was in love with him. Nobody, and I mean nobody, approved of us getting married, and definitely not going to Germany. Everyone said it wasn't going to work, but I was determined to make it work. I remember we got married in my apartment, and some of our close friends stood up for us. It was very casual, but it was sad because we knew in only a month he was leaving for Germany. I would have to come later after my orders came in. We would be apart for a few months. Kyle had taken leave for the entire month prior to his departure so we could have some more time together. My first ex-husband, Matt, tried to be cute by taking me to court. He thought Kyle and I were living together and he wanted to try and take Brent BD away from me. When he found out I was moving to Germany. Matt told the courts that he strongly opposed the idea. How could I possibly be allowed to take his daughter out of the country? Well, he wasn't going to allow it. The courts told him that legally I was married and that being with my husband didn't have a choice. I didn't have a choice, as it was his duty station since he was a soldier in the United States Army. I could take BD with me, and I was a custodial parent. And if Matt wanted to see BD, he would, my daughter, my first daughter, if he would have to travel to Germany. In order to exercise his visitation rights, Matt would be allowed to fly and get her at the start of the summer break. I would be responsible for her return by traveling back to the States and picking her up. After he fought so hard to take her from me, Matt never once in all 4 years were while we were in Germany made any effort to call or send a birthday present or a Christmas gift. Needless to say, I wasn't surprised. He never exercised his right to come get her, not even once. Anyway, Kyle ended up leaving for Hanau, Germany, November of '86, and I stayed in Kentucky praying that it wouldn't be long before I got my orders to join him. I can't remember when it was that I realized I was pregnant. However, the month before Kyle left for Germany, we hadn't used birth control. It wasn't that I was trying to get pregnant, we just didn't take any precautions not to. I remember when I told Kyle on the phone, he got really quiet, and he said, "I'm going to be a daddy." And I said, "Yes." And he was so happy. He was thrilled, shocked, but in a good way. My family, on the other hand, was definitely less than thrilled. They were horrified. They couldn't believe it. I think the words were, "Pregnant? Jesus. What if the marriage doesn't last like the other ones? Why don't you use that brain of yours? What are you thinking of? Why don't you get an abortion? What the hell are you thinking?" They were sitting glaring at me, cold-hearted, with that look. You know the look, when someone looks at you as though they're staring right through you. They were shooting daggers out of their eyes. My family was totally deafened by any response I might give them. They were cold and very emotional, saying that they would take my kids away from me and stop me from leaving. They thought I was a terrible mother. They said I wasn't thinking about the kids now. And here I was going to have another. The things they said hurt me and made me glad I would be leaving. Kyle and I both thought it took forever, but finally in February of '87 I got my orders. Kyle came back on leave to get the kids and me. Germany, here we come. I was scared, but I was determined to make it work. When we went to the airport, I had a huge lump in my throat and butterflies in my stomach. I could hardly say goodbye to anyone, especially my mother. I wanted to tell her I loved her so very much, but I pretended not to care. Once inside the airplane, I was a puddle of tears, shaking uncontrollably from head to toe. I remember in the airport I just started walking, and I didn't turn around to wave or throw a kiss. I just wanted to run to my mother and say, "I love you, please love me back," and give her a hug and a kiss. But I knew she wouldn't respond the way I wanted her to. That's why I just kept walking, not wanting to shed a tear. I was trying to be brave and look at it as an adventure, a chance of a lifetime. I could hardly swallow because of the lump in my throat when I sat down in the plane. I had wanted to tell my mom so much I loved her, but it was too late. I was on the way to Germany, no turning back now. I tried to think of only good things. It was hard, though. Anything could happen. What if someone in my family died, or one of us died? All I could think about was I hadn't left a good note. Would I be able to live with myself? I hadn't been able to say anything to her because she was so opposed to me going to Germany and taking my kids. And to her, it was like, there she goes, doing something, you know, just another bad choice. another wrong path. I didn't, to be honest, it was all a blur, but I wanted to know if they knew that I loved them and did they still love me. It always seems as though I have this knack for getting myself into things, but I totally refuse to admit that I made any mistake or wrongdoing on my part. If I started something right or wrong, I would stick with it to the very end. Sometimes I could even see that it wasn't a good idea, but I determined to prove it was. Any way I could. I knew that if I gave up and turned back, everyone would be able to say, I told you so. And I couldn't let that happen. I think my biggest downfall is that I can't admit that I have made a lot of bad choices in my life. I've always tried to look at other reasons why things have gone wrong, even though in my heart I knew I blindly jumped from one problem to the next without thinking of the consequences. I guess if I was totally honest with myself, I am to blame for the majority of heartaches in my life. After all, I've had plenty of people try to help me through the years, and I've always managed to push them away. Maybe I'm just self-destructive. Sometimes I actually feel like I'm my own worst enemy. So, let me say that was then, and this is now. And years later, I look back at my book and I look back at what I wrote, and I remember how I felt. And yes, I made a lot of mistakes that I regret, a lot of wrong decisions, a lot of people telling me to do something and me determined to prove them wrong. I look back and I think I should have done something different. I should have done this or I should have done that. But you can't. You can't go back. You can't change anything. And I did. I made all of those decisions. Every decision I made, and I take full responsibility for. Were they the right decisions? Most of them, no. I can honestly say, though, that going to Germany wasn't necessarily a wrong decision. I loved Kyle. I was pregnant. It was the military. It's a job. It's something that's what life you choose. And it wasn't horrible. Going to Germany was probably one of the highlights of my life. At first, I was scared to death. I remember how I felt. But I remember it wasn't all bad. I remember my life with Kyle wasn't all bad. I remember even going back to Matt, there were things I regret and things I wish I could go back and change, but you can't. You can't. You can't change decisions you make. You can't fix people. You know, I couldn't fix Matt's alcoholism or the fact that he was broody and never spoke to me. I can't fix Walker's drug addiction or alcoholism. I knew he loved me, but he was abusive, and I made a wrong decision. But I was with him, and I was married, and I tried, but I got out, and I survived. And then with Kyle, yeah, all the mistakes and things I had done, maybe it was the wrong decision, but the fact was I did marry him, and I did love him. And I don't really regret going to Germany. It was an experience for me and my children that we'll never forget. But I look back and I know I was self-destructive. I know I made lots of mistakes. Some of them probably on purpose. It was like when people told me to turn right, I was determined to turn left. I know that now. I see that now. But there's nothing you can do. Life is hard. And when you're young, you make a lot of mistakes. And I'm going through something right now. And there's a lot of things that I do as I've gotten older. And I look at my children and I think they're their own people, but there's a little bit of me inside of them. And I see one of my daughters as she's just young. She's young. She's going through her own life experiences. And yeah, she probably is going to make some mistakes. Everybody does. But I don't look at them the way my mother did. I don't look at them the way anybody does. I look at mistakes that people make as they're choosing their path. And no matter what you tell them, they're not going to see it the way that you see it. They're just not. They're adults and they're going to make their own mistakes. And I know that. So I try my hardest not to say anything. I do. They don't think I do, but I do. I try my hardest not to be my mother. And I hope my kids aren't going to be me. I hope it with all my heart. You know, I never wanted to be my mom. Maybe when I was little I thought my mother was like amazing. She could do anything. She knew everything. She was smart. She was strong. She was everything I wasn't. And I wanted to be her. But then after you grow up and you realize you can't be someone else. I could never be her because I'm my own person and I'm not the person that she was. And maybe I've had a much darker, messed up life. Maybe I'm much more of a wreck than my mother ever was. But the fact is, my kids are their own people. They'll make their decisions and they'll find their own paths in life. I can't give them advice. I have no right to. And even though maybe I have some life experiences that could help them, I try to offer my advice, but I can't change what they choose. What they choose is exactly what I choose. It's their own paths. I mean, that's just the way life is. And I probably accept that more than most people because I have made a lot of bad decisions. And so I just accept that, it is what it is. I can't give advice. I have no right to. I can try, but that doesn't mean that they have to take it. And I don't blame them if they don't. It's just what everybody does. Everybody chooses their paths. I don't know why I threw all that in. Maybe it's just because I'm going through a lot right now, which I'm sure I'll explain later. But I just wanted you to know that I was going through a lot when I wrote my book, and I wrote it from my heart with every pain and every tear, and I still feel every single thing that I wrote. It's just that now, after so many years, I mean, it's been like 30 years since I wrote my book. And now, after all these years, I look at it and I think, yeah, I did all of that. Every single word. I felt all of it. I realized that it was all my fault. Everything I did was my fault. And I have made peace with it. I can't change the mistakes I made. You just have to go forward. I'm still here. I'm still alive. I'm still fighting. But I've learned a lot. And I do take responsibility for the mistakes I made. I do. And I say it over and over and over again in this book. I just can't tell you right now what I'm going through. But I will. I promise. Just hang in there with me. Please.